The needle is a statistical model that tries to estimate the final result of an election based on incomplete preliminary returns. And the needle is useful because oftentimes the results that we get early on election night are not representative of the final outcome. So as an example, let's take a look at the needles that we published for the Georgia Senate runoff between Raphael Warnock and Kelly Loeffler in early 2021. So these are the results as they stood at 5 a.m. the morning after the election. As you can see, the Democrat has a 1-point lead, but if you break it down either by geography or the kind of vote, there's a huge variation. In urban areas, Warnock has a huge lead, while Loeffler leads in rural areas. And by method of voting, Warnock has a big advantage among the ballots that are cast by mail, while Loeffler is doing very well on the election day vote. The consequence of that is that the early results can potentially be really unrepresentative because depending on the state and county, different kinds of ballots get counted first. You can imagine that if we only saw the rural votes, that you would think that Loeffler was headed for a blowout victory. And on the other hand, you can imagine that depending on what method of vote came in first, the results could be very misleading. The needle seeks to address both of these problems, to account for what kinds of votes have been counted, as well as where the votes have been counted. The needle works by comparing the actual election results to our pre-election expectations for how the results will go. And so before the election, we have to make our best guess of how we think every county will vote, how every method of voting will go. And that's based on a combination of really every kind of data that we can throw at the problem. As the results come in, we compare the actual results to those pre-election expectations. And we'll also, as time goes on, be able to narrow the bucket of what kinds of votes are left. And we'll add that together with the votes that's been counted to make a final projection. Take a look at how this played out over the course of the night in Georgia. The solid line, that's our estimate for what the final result will be. You can see it starts out projecting a tied race. The dotted line is the actual tabulated vote count that has been reported from the state of Georgia at any given time. And then on either side of the estimate, you can see this shaded area of light red or light blue. That's our confidence interval. That's the range of possible outcomes that we think are possible given the data that we've seen to this point, how confident we are in that data, and what data remains. So the polls close in Georgia at 7 p.m. and you can see that pretty quickly the needle begins to think that Warnock is the favorite. That's because these early results that you're looking at, which lean Democratic it seems, were better than we expected for Warnock. So it's not simply that Warnock's in the lead, it's that in the areas that have reported he's doing better than we anticipated, such that by 8 p.m. and certainly by 9 p.m. we think he's ahead by 1, even 2 percentage points. Now after 9 p.m., Kelly Loeffler ends up taking the lead in the tabulated vote. And that's because by this point in the night, almost all of the state has counted its election day vote, which is heavily Republican, and the only thing that remains is a scattering of votes in and around Atlanta. Even at the end of the night, our estimate is that Warnock will do quite a bit better than the vote that's been tabulated at this point. That's because in our view, almost all of the remaining vote is heavily Democratic mail vote, predominantly from around Atlanta. And in the end, Warnock wins by 2 points, just as we project. And look at the confidence interval on this chart. You can see it's steadily shrinking as time goes on. That reflects our growing confidence that we understand what's going on in the race. The needle is doing a lot of work here to sort of iron out that a lot of these swings in the tabulated results aren't indicative of a swing in the likely outcome. They're just a reflection of which votes have been counted to that point. Now, there's one big caveat in all of this, which is that this Georgia needle is about as good as it gets. In some states, we have no idea how many votes we expect to ultimately be counted. In other states, we don't have a great sense of whether we're looking at mail votes or early votes or a mix of all of it. So if you're watching it, don't just look at whether Harris is ahead or whether Trump is ahead in Pennsylvania by 1. Also look at our characterization of how confident we are in the outcome. We'll tell you whether we consider the race a toss-up or lean Harris or very likely Trump and so on. There's also a probability that says, hey, Trump has an 88% chance or a 62% chance of winning the state. Those probabilities are real. If it's less than 100%, that means that we think that there's a chance that the other candidate can still win that race.